I'm Scott L. Miller. It is Sunday night. It is December 7th. It is time for a live broadcast from Leon, Nicaragua. Welcome to the show. We're going to give people a few seconds to be signing on, but we're going to be doing a relatively short one today. This is not a long show. This is, today we're going to be doing a coverage of our daily. We're going to talk a little bit about logic that is, or mislogic, illogic, that is given to people often when they are looking at evaluating a place, and this happens in a lot of situations outside of travel, outside of expats, outside of digital nomads. It's common things in business and has nothing in particular to do with Nicaragua or with being an expat. However, I do find that we have a very large percentage of the time that people do use this mislogic, and it implies that somewhere behind the scenes, somewhere, somebody has been attempting to trick them, right? And so this is a very powerful thing to be watching for in our own behavior, thought processes, and so forth. And shout out hello to the people who have joined us this evening. Thanks for hopping on. We got the first people getting on. I am spending most of the day. I was out at the beach doing some work this morning. Got to go and help out with the one of the present drives for local kids. So one of the churches was collecting stuff, so I was helping move some people around for that, and had to do some errands out on the beach this morning, and am, as of noon-ish, spending the day hanging out with my daughters, binging Stranger Things. We've seen it before, and we've actually completed it all the way up to as far as it goes, but we haven't seen the older episodes for a while, so we're going back and binging the first 4.5 seasons, so that when the new final episodes drop in 2 weeks, that we will be ready. 2.5 weeks we will be ready. And Tenbai is on. Tenbai says, "Hi Scott, I really like all the short lives you've been doing lately." You know, I do too. I hate when I forget all day and then at 11:30 at night I'm jumping on going, oh no, but in general I really like it. It's fun. It's a lot more time to connect with you guys, and it does actually save me a bit of time. So it's been great. I'm glad that we're getting a lot of good feedback. You're not the only one who said anything. A lot of people have said that they really like it because it turns into a normal episode afterwards, right? So anyone who's just looking for a daily, they're still getting it. It's still part of the daily queue. But for those who see the announcement, you get a chance to hop on, and so you get two different. We're getting two different viewing mechanisms out of a single event. So it's been very cool. All right, so we're keeping this one extra short today because, like I said, I'm binging shows with my daughters, and they're waiting for me to get back to them. We're taking a little bit of a break. We'll probably go for about 2-3 more episodes before calling it a night. I already made them dinner, which we do quite late around here. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about this logic of until it's not, and this is something to be watching out for when you're, and of course, I want everyone to stop and think as we talk about this, to not have this be a takeaway about Nicaragua, not about travel or expats or anything like that. I want to be talking about this as a more general thing. Yes, apply it to those things, of course, but apply it to life in general. Watch out for this, whether it's at a job, in a meeting, and business, in anything. This is a tactic that salespeople use to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt in situations where none should exist, and it's stating something that should never be stated, right? And so the phrase that's used is until it's not. And so I'll give some examples, and you'll probably almost all, if you've been spending time in discussions with people or reading comments about moving to Nicaragua especially, and we'll talk about why it comes up more often than other places here. But you see this in business constantly. As someone who's worked in IT, I've had to deal with managers who are not able to do their jobs. Like there's exceptions, but generally they lack the basics of business and are easy prey for salespeople. And so salespeople use these tactics quite a bit. And so in IT, right, we may hear things like Linux has been more secure than Windows for 30 years. And they say, oh, sure, it's more secure now until it's not, which makes absolutely no sense, right? Well, okay, but it is more secure, and it always has been. So track record says it's more secure. It's more secure now. All tests say it's more secure. There's no reason it would, what? And so let's apply some of this to things you may have heard about Nicaragua. Oh, sure. And you'll often get this from people who Not always, not always. Sometimes it's purely creating FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, to make you question good decisions, right? You only need FUD when someone identifies you're making a good decision, you're on a good path, and they need to derail you, right? So always be watching for FUD. FUD is not something that you use in good decision making, right? So, but we're emotional creatures, and it tends to derail us quite easily. So you may say things like, Nicaragua is very safe. And they'll say, well, sure, until it's not. Well, Nicaragua is really affordable. Oh, absolutely, until it's not. Real estate, it's very, very stable market where you really don't have to worry about, eminent domain or things like that taking your property. Oh, sure, until they do, right? Or it's very easy for Americans to move to Nicaragua, right? We don't need special visas. We can just come and then, right? Oh, sure, they're open and welcoming until they're not. And these things can apply to anything. But so what the pattern generally is you've identified something positive about a decision you want to make. Linux is faster, cheaper, and safer than Windows, right? If someone has absolutely no argument for why you wouldn't use it, then a common tactic is to start looking for where you can find fear, uncertainty, and doubt. If you have no kernels from which to work for fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? Well, there's no real way to make someone feel like Linux is insecure. There's no way to make them feel it's expensive. There's no way to make them feel it's unstable. Now we're desperate. So now we have to attack the concept of facts. We're attacking the fabric of reality, basically. And so this is a last-ditch effort to say, okay, we've established that there's no reason not to choose X. But what if the factors change in the future and it's no longer a good decision someday that is not now? What? That's so unreasonable. That's so insane. But the problem is that it's true. Anything could change in the future, right? Linux could become insecure. It can't become expensive. There's protections against that. But it could become insecure. It could become unstable. Those are kind of true things. Like they could. Windows could also become even less secure or even more expensive, right? Those things could change as well. It could go either way. You don't know. But when we're using these tactics, you're basically guaranteed that only certain types of ones will cause people to have a reaction, right? For example, if you said, we'll pick on Norway. Norway is outrageously expensive. You said, I don't want to move to Norway today because it's just too expensive. No offense, Norway, wonderful place, but I can't afford to live there. Someone could say, well, sure, today, but what if I got cheap in the future? You go, I guess maybe, but probably not, right? Or I can't bank on that. I'll have to, I have to pay for it today, right? I have to live with the decision now, not in some magical future, right? Or if you said, sure, it's expensive and you can't afford it, but imagine it could become even more expensive and there'd be no hope of you affording it. Okay, but I'm already not doing it, right? So when you're doing it in that direction, it doesn't tend to work. We don't have the emotional plea that's viable in making you not make that decision. But if you do the opposite, you say, well, I'm going to move to, and we'll pick on Morocco, and say Morocco is decently safe and extremely affordable. I think I might consider that. And someone says, well, sure, it's affordable now, but in the future it may not be. What happens when it's not anymore? Well, the reality is one, how do you use that knowledge, right? Okay, it could become expensive, but any place could become unaffordable. I can't not live anywhere because of the universal truth that any place could become expensive, right? I can't use that knowledge. That is not viable knowledge. It's completely worthless. So you have to question, why would someone bring that up? There's no utility to saying it. It's also obviously misleading, right? Do you have a reason to believe it will become expensive? No, because if you did, you would bring that up. You wouldn't say, well, until it's not, affordable, you would say. But right, they've made these fiscal policies that we think are going to make it less cost effective in the future. And you say, okay, do I believe that? Do I agree with your conjecture? Maybe you do. Maybe they have really good logic for that, right? Oh, well, look, they've borrowed 10 times their national their GDP. I think that they're going to have a hard time paying that back, and I think the International Monetary Fund is going to be punitive and cause these problems because they have in the past with other places, and there's a track record, there's a pattern, there's logic. Okay, it still doesn't mean it's going to be true, but it gives a foundation to it. People who have an argument will make it. If you don't have an argument, then taking things that are true and saying, well, sure, but what about this unstoppable truism that what's true today may not be true in the future? Okay, sure, but I can't use that logic. I cannot apply it to any decision making. So bringing it up is pointless. The problem is that we're humans, right? So if you were to bring this up to a computer that was making a logical decision and solely going by logic, you could bring this up a million times. It would never change the decision once. It would immediately throw it out as unusable data, right? Because it doesn't have any way to apply it meaningfully. But humans, when they hear this potential risk, we react negatively to it. We react emotionally to it. The positive example that I gave, what if you moved to Norway and couldn't afford it today, but you were hoping it became affordable in the future, right? That doesn't really give us an emotional place of being like, oh, I'm so excited that Norway for no reason could become affordable and I just didn't realize it, right? We don't get that feeling. Normal people don't anyway. But if I say, okay, this thing that sounds great today, Morocco, but it may not be great tomorrow, two things happen. One, it sounds like the person. It isn't. But it gives the sound of a person giving us advice. Right? They know something we don't. We always wonder this. Do they know something we don't? Of course they don't. They have no clue. That's why they said this, is because they have zero reasoned ability to make a reasoned argument. And two, it's scary. It is true that no matter what choice we make, it might be the wrong one. Or we may hope, not making a wrong decision, but we may hope that the place we pick, Morocco in this example, remains outrageously affordable so that we can take advantage of that arbitrage until we drop, right? And we are hopeful for that. Well, and someone's throwing in that wrench of, but that might not come to fruition. You're right, it might not, but it might. And we have no reason to believe it won't, and I don't have a better alternative to work from. And so what do you expect me to do with that? So some tools here. One is if you're just having this feeling or you catch yourself maybe repeating this, because people will say it, you'll see it written places, immediately stop and go, whoa, if I came up with this, it's just my mind playing tricks on me. If someone said this to me, it's someone full out tricking me. Maybe they're repeating someone who's tricking them. Don't just, lash out at whoever repeats this. But somewhere, somebody panicked and said, because it's the only source of something like this, really, and said, I can't win this argument using logic or facts, so I'm going to throw out this thing that can't be disputed and use it in such a way that I don't have to defend it, but people will start to worry, right? And that's very powerful. So watch out for people doing that, right? As soon as you hear someone do that, that is, you won that argument. You have to stop and say, we were having a discussion about what places are affordable, what places are safe, what places are good to move to. They essentially have just admitted the place I was picking, Morocco in this example, is so good they've got nothing. Nothing. And not only do they have nothing, they've tipped their hand and showed that they are willing to play tricks on me to try to dissuade me from sticking to my good decision. And so this tells you two things. One, it tells you that they essentially agree with you. For all intents and purposes, it's going to mean that they have just agreed with you. Great. You have their sign off. They didn't want to sign off. They're unwilling to sign off, but they did. And two, you now have the absolute knowledge that that person is not in reference to being a guide to whatever it is you're talking about, business, operating systems, or expattery. That person has tipped their hand there and admitted to you that they are not your ally. They are not working towards the same goal as you. They have recognized that you are working towards your goal, and they want to disrupt that process for probably personal gains, whether it's a political personal gain or a religious personal gain or a financial personal gain, or maybe they just don't want you to move and they want you to stay with them. So maybe it's but this is my friend, I love them so much and I don't want them to move. They're going to move because it's better for them overall, and I want to sabotage that so that they stay my neighbor or whatever. Right, which is not the most nefarious of options, but one way or another, this action becomes nefarious and becomes harmful, and is not something you want to permit. So you've got two options. One is to just recognize these things and shut it down, even if only in your mind. Maybe someone's just going to keep trying to make excuses to you, but you have to stop and use logic, because if you just let it pass, they'll use this as a subconscious trick on you. But if you consciously, every time someone says it, you stop and go, I know they are continuing to admit that I'm right, and they are continuing to let me know that they are trying to trick me because they've got nothing to work with. So use it to strengthen your position rather than to weaken it, right? Don't just never repeat something like that, right? This is something that I talk to when I'm talking to people, like trying to help them with how they interact with other people for the health of conversations. Again, personal or business, this thing's true. Something I say is never repeat other people's lies, right? And it's often very hard. Someone will say, well, this person's concerned about this thing, and so the great example I give is from Santo Domingo recently. This person said, oh, the government seized property. I said, okay, show me where they seized property. Well, then he admitted it was fabricated by someone, or it was unfounded, right? We don't know it's fabricated, but we know it's unfounded. So we pressed, and he said, okay. And then he admitted that he had unfounded, he had no reason to be repeating that thing, and then within a minute or two, he repeated it again. And very importantly, you have to shut that down. Never allow people to repeat. Once something is identified as a lie, don't let them repeat it, right? Call it out. Look, dude, and I did every time. I'm like, you told me that you had no reason to believe this, so why are you telling me to me again? We've already established that this isn't fact. So what's going on here, right? And it was a very awkward conversation, I think, because multiple times, maybe 8 in a single conversation, I pointed out that he had admitted that things he were telling me not were false, guaranteed, but had no reason to believe were true. He had simply fabricated them or knew someone had fabricated them and was repeating it. And I said, but this isn't a fact you have. Why are you telling me these things as fact when you already admitted that they aren't, right? That's the first stage. The second stage, and most people do this, is when talking about this, once you've kind of realized someone lied to you, if you don't want to call them out, the thing that ends up happening is we end up repeating the lie. We put our own integrity on the line. Don't do that. So if someone said, this person stole this land, they don't have a deed to it. And I say, did you check? Did you ask who does have a deed to it? No. Do you know that they don't? No. Did they do something illegal? I'm sure they did. Okay, but do you know what that thing is? Well, no, I just don't like them. So I'm sure they would do something illegal. Okay, but you have no reason to think that they did. You're making that up. The person doing something illegal here, you, right? This is slander, not repeating some fact or a solid intuition based on fact, right? The more I got him to talk, the more it was really clear that the only person who may have been doing something illegal was him, which is not surprising, right? Often people who are doing something illegal project that because they're nervous about it, or they're trying to, in this case, it would have been nervous or feeling awkward about it. But in a more legal perspective, you may be trying to, shunt responsibility and get attention off of you onto someone else, so they're less likely to look at you, but you're more likely to accuse someone of something you've done. In this particular case, I think the person was trying to make it sound like squatters were illegal when they're local, like Nicaraguans are allowed to squat in Nicaragua, and the reality is I think he was squatting, but wasn't Nicaraguan. That's a lot more. Squatting as a Nicaraguan is completely legal as long as you leave if you don't manage to squat long enough and do the improvements you need. But as a foreigner, pretty sure, I've never actually looked into this, but I'm pretty sure it's just illegal across the board. It definitely should be. I would, even as a foreigner, I would support that we should not be allowed to squat on anything. It's just a bad idea. And I don't think we are. So we don't want to repeat this, but this is something that people do all the time, right? Well, my aunt, she says these things, and then we talk about it, and I'm like, so these can't be true, right? And here we can get to the point where they're like, oh, I see, she must be confused or lying or something terrible or was misinformed, right? One way or another. Okay, we don't know if she's being nefarious, but we know she's spreading misinformation. Okay, done. Now, it's very tempting to simply repeat what she said again. You have this conversation, and people do this to me constantly. I'll be like, okay, so we've established you have misinformation. Yeah, that's not right. And then while talking, I'm not talking about a month later talking to someone else. I'm talking immediately, within 2-3 minutes to me, they will repeat the misinformation again. I'll be like, whoa. Why did you just put your integrity behind something you've already established? We know you don't know. I know you just lied to me, right? Why did you do that? What made you, and because what's happening when you lie repeatedly is you start to build pathways in your brain that start to believe those lies. Thomas Jefferson famously did this to the point where he was insane by the time he was older. He's famous for being just outrageously dishonest. He lied in every conversation about anything and everything. He didn't just lie about careful things where he was trying to manipulate someone, which is bad enough. But he was a habitual liar who lied about every aspect of his life and things going on around him. He lied about what he had for breakfast. He lied about what he did that day. He lied about how much money he had. He lied about his activities. He lied about his opponents politically. He lied. And he's the father of yellow journalism, right, as we know it in the modern world. So not surprising that the two go together. But this is a man who lied to a point that his own friends, by the time he was older, right? When he was young, they're like, yeah, he pretty much knows what's going on. But by the time he was old, his lies were so common that it is believed he had lost grasp of reality. He was no longer able to actually identify real from unreal, the actual world around him from this fabricated one that he always maintained. And his lies weren't consistent. Like, he wasn't a good liar. He was an idiot, right? But he had lied so much that it basically deteriorated his brain. It acted a lot like syphilis, right? If you lie too much, you end up being kind of a gibbering moron, right? And this is something we see in politics from time to time, but Thomas Jefferson is a really famous example of it. Someone who was able to be brilliant when he was young. A lot of people who do this don't have that, right? So this is an extreme example where we know, at least from we know he was never a good person, right? That's the foundation of being utterly dishonest. He was a terrible human being, right? You would never want to be friends with this person. You would never want to interact with them. You would never want your family members around them. You would certainly never leave your children with him, right? This was a terrible human being, just filth of the earth. But we also know he was incredibly smart and well-spoken and able to present himself well and write really well. And they chose him for some isolated tasks that they were able to guardrail him, right, writing documents that people had to approve and had to iterate on through committee, and he was able to deliver brilliant prose and write really, really excellently and produce amazing documents, right? So we know he had a functional brain when he was younger, and then by the time he was older, that had gone, and the hypothesis of his friends was that these lies aided him. So this is something that's very important, not just for getting your information right, not just for not being dishonest to the people around you, right? You don't want to be an amplifier to misinformation. You don't want to be the person who you basically got played by someone else and then voluntarily plays the next person, right? So we don't want to do that. But we also play ourselves in two ways. One is it just deteriorates our brain, but two, that's the general sense. That's the long-term effect that Thomas Jefferson had, but lots of people do. But the more specific is that it will take that specific lie and make it feel true to you. And this is something that people who need to beat a polygraph, for example, they will simply repeat something false ad nauseum, and eventually your brain will start to accept it. You can do this to yourself intentionally. This is a tactic that criminals use, right? I don't want to break down in court and admit that I did something, so I'm just going to keep saying I didn't do it to myself in private. I will never let that facade slip, even to myself. I'll never let myself think I robbed a bank. I will look in the mirror and be like, those jerks are trying to pin this bank robbery on me. Meanwhile, the bags of money are sitting in my closet in a secret little compartment that they haven't found yet, right? And you just keep saying, I don't know how those got there. In fact, I don't even think they're actually there, right? And you know that later you'll be like, I'm sure I didn't rob a bank. And once you're already free and clear, then you're like, I'm sure I didn't do this. And I'm imagining that there's money under my floorboards. I'm just going to go check. Oh my gosh, I have millions of dollars. I wonder how that got there, right? And you'll have you'll have a free conscience because you convinced yourself you didn't do it, right? That actually works. But when someone's tricking you and you repeat their lies, it makes those lies real in your brain. So you're actually tricking yourself, and this is what they want you to do, right? So this is part of this tool until it's not. And so Nicaragua has a great track record of being safe, and so people don't have a way to say, but we expect it not to be safe in the future. No, we have nothing happening in country that would give you that a reason to think that that could happen. We know no place on earth is guaranteed not to become dangerous. That's impossible. So we know that things could change, and somewhere between tomorrow and some indefinite future, millions of years in the future, Nicaragua could become dangerous. It also could become safe again. It could also never become dangerous, right? There's lots of possibilities. It could even get safer, as much as that would be difficult. It could happen, right? And so with this, if you get people to start going, yeah, I know it's safe, but what if it's not? Then what happens is you start applying this obvious lie. And you don't want to shame the person, which you should want to do, right? If someone's lying to you, you should want to call them out. That would be the healthy thing. That's the adult good interaction. No matter what culture you're from, this doesn't matter, right? This is the thing that's actually good for everyone. Society benefits when we don't allow misinformation. However, it doesn't feel good in the moment. So people really hate doing it, right? So people generally don't. And people know that people generally don't. And so they use this as a way to basically socially pressure you to accept a lie, and often to repeat a lie, especially in their presence. You won't feel comfortable stating the opposite after they've told you something, right? So it's very powerful. What they want you to do is start hearing that voice in your head. Well, I know Nicaragua's affordable. I know it's safe. But those things could change, sure. But they could change anywhere. And places, it just, you don't have that assurance. So you have to not use that, because the only possibilities, the only ones, are that you ignore that, or you allow it to trick you into harming yourself, right? Going into a place that's not as safe, not using real safety and real cost of living numbers or whatever, and doing something random. And we see this all the time. All these people who end up in Costa Rica thinking supposedly that it was safe. Now, did they do any research? Did they had to do these tricks to try, they had to look at all the safer places and say, well, sure, those places are all safer now, but what happens when they're not? And the answer is, right, so first of all, so you should get to that point. You should get to the point where this doesn't affect you. You should get to the point where it's impossible for this to affect you. But then, if you truly get to that point, which is super important, this is just adulting, how to deal with a world that will feed you misinformation, right? We all have to deal with this. We all have to deal with salespeople. We all have to deal with marketing messages. We all have to deal with propaganda. We all have to deal with friends and family and acquaintances and employers who will just give us misinformation, either because they're idiots and got misinformed themselves, or because they're actively trying to manipulate us and are willing to lie to do so, right? We all have to deal with that. It's not something anybody gets to. It's just part of the human experience. Now, once you've gotten to that point, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to let that trick affect me anymore, then there's another layer, right? Well, I am concerned anywhere, I'm not applying this to a single place, that the knowledge I acquired today, right, all of the countries that are safe, all of the countries that are affordable, what if whatever one I pick stops being safe or affordable, or both, in the future? What if? Okay. Now we're no longer using it to trick ourselves. Now we're trying to approach this general unstoppable truth in a useful way. Well, the answer is by staying flexible, right? Whatever's allowing you to, in this particular example, and just apply this, step back and look at the situation and think about whatever your triage is going to be, whatever it is that we're discussing, and say, well, what if, okay, so we decide we're going to pick Nicaragua, and it does get expensive, or it does become dangerous to a point where we want to do something about it. Well, there'll be multiple factors that we can consider when the time comes, but even, and you can hear fireworks, by the way, that's the griteria is going on as we speak, and my two poor dogs are here at my feet, just terrified. And I live way out in the country. You guys can hear how much fireworks is going on. That's been going on for like 10 minutes already. Then either you're going to do something that will affect safety, right? Maybe you have the power in the future to impact safety and say, oh, it became dangerous, I'm going to do something about it. Or it got expensive, I'm going to do something about it. Or maybe you become rich in the future and you don't care. And you're like, oh, it's more expensive, that's unfortunate, but I don't care. That's fine. Or you say, no, I'm still in the same boat, I'm still concerned about cost of living, and I'm still concerned about safety. Reasonable, that's probably the case. Well, then, just like I'm making the decision to move to Nicaragua today because these are the right factors, if those factors change, then I will simply make the same decision again to move somewhere else in the future based on reality at that time rather than a hypothesized reality that will never get right in the past. And so even if we were to be tricked by the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which we should not be, we should be able to stop that. If we did good triage logic, in almost all cases, we can go, but even if it did happen, right, it's not a real risk. There's ways to protect against it anyway. So I wanted to bring that up because this comes up so often. I can't believe how often I say, okay, so here's your factors, and someone defends doing something that makes no sense by saying until it's not, right? And it's like, did you just admit that you're making a bad decision? Did that not stop, right? As an investor or as an expat, in both of those cases, if I say that, I should immediately hear alarm bells and go, what have I done? What have I put into my own brain? How much damage have I done to myself financially or whatever in life decisions by being tricked by this? This is bad. This should really be like, you should be terrified for yourself, right? So it's an important way of looking at it. So I wanted to share that, and I'm going to read some of the comments. Gigi is here. She said, hey, did you see the email I sent you? I did, Gigi. I have not responded to email in a few days. I did absolutely see it, and that is fantastic. I sent you showing that I'm in your top 0.1% of viewers, watched 183 of your videos in 2025. Yours was my most watched channel. That's so awesome. Thank you very much. Wanted to share and give you kudos for your great show. That's so cool. I really like that. Diego said, if Linux becomes insecure, someone will fork it. This is a perfect example of what I mean by having this triage thought, right? So Diego's basically, I know Diego, right? So he's like, Linux is not going to do those things. We're not worried about that. But, and exactly what I said about, well, in the future, if Nicaragua became dangerous, we would simply find a place that's safe and move on, or costly and move on to a place that's cheap. If Linux was to somehow become insecure, we know how easy it is to fork. There are protections in place, and someone will, and if no one does, which is impossible, but if no one did, we ourselves could fork it and fix that problem. So it's not even a problem, even if the thing we're afraid of happens. It's not a real fear. It's a fake fear, which is very often the case, right? Because once you're coming up with FUD, it doesn't need to be real in any way. People are emotional. She just said, hey, can you do videos showing the griteria and holiday celebrations from Nicaragua more often? They're very hard for me to do. Often they're at night, so they're very hard to show. You guys will basically get nothing. I have done the griteria before, so I do have videos on it. I think from 2023 would be my guess. I don't think it was last year, but it could have been last year. But I will try to get out and do more. They are very difficult for me to do, especially because, like this one, my dogs are freaking out during the griteria, so it's very hard for me to go without abandoning them. They're both behind my chair, these poor little dogs. Such good dogs. You are. Jan says, do you not have a ton of people outside your place with fireworks right now? I do not. The fireworks are all coming from far away. No one's over here doing anything. Muddy River Fishing says, lol, I'm Guatemalan from Chicago. My mom is from Guatemala, and she is crazy, lol. Safety stuff offends me. Forgot to mention, I'm from Chicago. Hey, Muddy River Fishing, good to see you here. Go to Guatemala. I'll keep white people safe. I'll hug you. So I've been to Guatemala. I absolutely love it. It is my second favorite country to potentially live in. So if I always say, people ask me a lot, like, right, this exact thing. What if something was to change in Nicaragua and presumably nothing else in the world changes, right? So that's it's a contrived question, but what if something was to change in Nicaragua that would make it unsafe, or our visa's not welcome, or it's no longer cost effective, or something? If one of these factors that is so important, or many of them, were to change, what would we do? And people ask me, like, what would be your fallback? Or what if Nicaragua didn't exist? What would be your next choice? And very clearly, our next choice would be Guatemala. I've spent some time up there, and I work there a little bit, and it's fantastic. Guatemala is a wonderful country. Guatemala City is my favorite city anywhere, and or at least in the Western Hemisphere. I'm always, I mean, these days, it's got to be my overall favorite city, but I really do love Rome and Madrid as well. But Guatemala City, absolutely my favorite Western Hemisphere city, for sure, probably my favorite city anywhere. I love the food, the weather, the culture, the resources, the access to things. The city especially, but I enjoy time on Atitlan. I enjoy, small towns. I spent time in Tecpan, which was just beautiful. Being up in the Guatemalan Alps region is so cool. It really does feel like Switzerland in the summer up there. I rented a farmhouse with some employees, and we had such a good time just hanging out in the middle of nowhere. And I realized Tecpan is the old capital. It's not the middle of nowhere, but it feels kind of like we were in the countryside, right? So we had a couple neighbors on a little dirt road, but we were just overlooking, hit the microphone, just overlooking forest, and we could get to Tecpan reasonably, but we were far enough out that like we didn't have Uber or any easy transportation, and it was just fantastic being in the semi-country area, and it was great. We really enjoyed Guatemala, and I'm hoping my kids can spend a lot of time up there pretty soon. We're able to drive back and forth, and the plan is that we're getting a train between us and there, and that's going to be amazing that we can just zip back and forth. But if we were not living in Nicaragua, absolutely buying a place in Guatemala City would be what we wanted to do. That would be where we would go. Because it's so nice. So yeah, no, love Guatemala, absolutely. And I like the stuff in between, right? I like El Salvador, I like Honduras, I like Mexico. Costa Rica, very low on our list. It's a great place to visit. I love Costa Rica, not anti-gay. It's easy as an expat to end up in an anti-Costa Rica vibe, and it's really an anti. Expats who know what they're doing really are driven crazy by the huge swaths of expats who do zero research, don't look at anything, don't believe anything, don't evaluate, don't try things out, and then they all end up in Costa Rica, it seems, or in Cancun, right? And they're just loaded with the worst communities. There's obviously great people. There's obviously somebody who does a bunch of research, and Costa Rica is the right place for them, but it is such a giant pool of the worst unresearched expats that go to CR that if I'm in Costa Rica and manage to completely avoid the expat community, then it's great. It's basically just like a slightly more expensive Nicaragua, and it's wonderful. And I do like San Jose. Chepe Town is nice, but to really live there, it's quite a bit smaller than Nicaragua with so many expats, and obviously there's some good expats mixed in, but for the most part, it's San Juan del Sur on steroids at a massive scale. I don't want to go there in Nicaragua. I certainly don't want to go there in Costa Rica and pay even more for it. So basically all the expats that enjoy spending time with each other in the research sense, wherever they are in the world, all have the same experience with CR, right? That it's just It's a very different thing. But then back to Panama. I used to live in Panama, and it's wonderful. There's so many great choices, even just here in this very tight region, let alone South America. But Nicaragua really did bubble to the top, and is where we came and decided to stay. But Guatemala really is a clear second place with, and I say this a lot, most likely Panama would be our third choice. We really did like it there. It's so much smaller and so much more expensive. Those are challenging, but it's got a lot of great stuff going for it as well. Especially its transportation hub is a big deal. I am a drunk guy. What's up from Hinotepe? My first time being here during the Purissima. I learned the songs quick and got some goodies. Great sight to see tons of people on the street singing and fireworks. Yeah, it's a big celebration everywhere. It's pretty cool. I'm avoiding it today. I'm just hiding. I had to be on the beach this morning. Oh my gosh, we couldn't even drive down the street. And that was long ago. I learned about Nicaragua a lot from your channel. Thank you. Expats are immigrants, though, Doug. No, that is incorrect. We have a lot of videos on that. And it is completely incorrect. ICE is looking for expats, not immigrants. Sometimes they look for immigrants. But an immigrant, by definition, is someone who is permanently in a country or attempting to be. Right, so I'm an immigrant, right? I'm an immigrant to Nicaragua, but when we're talking about expats, we are not talking about immigrants. We're talking about expats. An expat is anyone who lives outside their own country. That is the definition of an expat. An immigrant is a person who has immigrated to another country. So all immigrants must be expats, but the vast majority of expats are not immigrants, right? So if you're a digital nomad, you're an expat, but not an immigrant. So when you're in the United States, this is one of the tricks. The United States wants to trick people and get you to call expats immigrants to do harm to minority communities. So it's very important that this is so what they do in the U.S. and many places is they want to manipulate you to do racial harm, right? To go after minority communities, and so to do so, they actually try to pretend that people using the language correctly and accurately are wrong, and that calling everyone an immigrant is correct, and that's dangerous because it allows for this idea that when Americans go abroad, we're expats. And that's generally true. Most Americans who move abroad are expats. I mean, all that go are expats, but non-immigrant expats. We use that term sometimes, non-immigrant expat. Here in Nicaragua, for example, something like 90% of the foreigners who live here, right? We're not talking about tourists for the weekend or, a 2-week vacation. We're talking about people who have bought a house, rented an apartment, or don't leave the country for more than a few weeks a year, that kind of stuff. About 90% of them are non-immigrant expats. They're here full time, but they're not here for forever. They're not, and both from a personal standpoint, right? You can be an immigrant on a purely personal basis. Look, I moved to Nicaragua. I never plan on leaving, and hopefully they don't kick me out. Okay, that's a soft immigrant. And then if Nicaragua accepts you as an immigrant, okay, you're now a permanent immigrant. Then you can be that. And importantly, in much of the world, or in many, but in some really key places like Southeast Asia, like Thailand, it is illegal for a expat to call themselves an immigrant. Immigrant is a legal status. Now, it's always a linguistic status, but in parts of the world, it is a visa status, and they're very clear about you can't misuse that, because you would actually be like, if you said that to a police officer and you said, "Oh, I'm an immigrant," and then they looked and said, "You're an expat, right? Why did you lie to me?" Right? It's not the same as lying about being a citizen. That would be way worse if you weren't really a citizen. But an immigrant is a very specific expectation anywhere that you've been accepted as permanent. So in the United States, a true immigrant we would generally accept as having at least a green card or citizenship. Technically, if you're attempting to get a green card and reasonably think you will get it, you would be an immigrant linguistically, But it's so in the U.S. they want you to say immigrant about expats because they try to make it sound bad, even though in the rest of the world being an immigrant is the good thing and expat is the, well, you're just passing through. Tell that to the Mexicans in little villages in Chicago. I am telling it to them, right? It's very, very, very important to tell, especially Latin communities in the United States, to not accept and not themselves. And remember the first thing I did, right? I was talking about the until it's not, but I said when we repeat lies, it causes our brains to have bad pathways. This is something we really want. And one of the reasons that this works, especially in Latin communities, is because in Spanish, the words mean something very different. Expat has the word that sounds like expat in Spanish has an extremely negative connotation. So most Spanish speakers moving into places like the United States don't naturally want to call themselves an expat. They have a very strong linguistic tendency to want to avoid it for logical reasons. And that makes them easy to manipulate into not using it, right? Because they don't have this natural desire to use it the way that English speakers do. So we especially want to educate Latin and Spanish speaking and Portuguese speaking communities to, when using English, don't let the what's correct in Spanish spill over based on sound into what they say in English. Because you want to be accurate, right? When you're portraying to an American, you want to be like, I'm an expat. And then when they go, you're an immigrant, you go, do you not speak English? Do you need an education on English? Are you an expat here? Why don't you speak English, right? Always be prepared with that, and question their English and their heritage, right? Always be ready. If you've got white people who are native English speakers in America, I'm always like, be ready to call them out and be like, I don't believe you're from America or you would know these words. These are basic English words. If this wasn't my first language, I wouldn't expect you to know that. But seriously, it's very important, right? Because Americans have a tendency to be like, oh, I'm special, I'm an expat. And the reason that it sounds that way is because, to Americans, we don't need to become permanent in a new country. We become temporary, maybe for 20 years, but we're still temporary. And we move to wherever we feel like going because we have the power of being an expat. And that's more or less true. But tons of Mexicans coming to the United States are doing the exact same thing, right? They're coming into the United States and they have the flexibility to go on to Canada or maybe to Argentina, right? And I have Mexican friends who do this. And they should be in the same way like, no, I'm an expat. I don't need to choose the United States. I'm just here for now, right? I go where I want to go. I'm an expat, right? And having that power linguistically is important. So when people are like, you're an illegal immigrant, you're like, what do you mean I'm not even an immigrant. I'm just visiting, right? Whether it's for a long time or not, right? Could be 20 years, it could be 2 days, right? Mexicans got an amazing amount of gofio this time. This is Janet. I love gofio, and we get to visit Ramon's sister, who came for the evening from Managua. Very cool. How much do you really need to be a digital nomad? Diego, I'm not understanding the question. What do you really need? Muddy says, well, you're a gringo, right? So gringo means foreigner in Spanish. So English speakers have a tendency to be confused about gringo because many expat communities in the United States don't actually speak Spanish really deeply and don't know what gringo means. And so you'll hear these wacky stories from people who really don't know Spanish who will say things like, well, it refers to Americans, it comes from the Mexican-American War, things like really basic mistakes that are weird that people would repeat. Like it really flags that they don't know Spanish. But gringo is a mispronunciation of grigo, which is Greek, in the same way that English speakers say that's all Greek to me, and we use Greek loosely in many cultures all across Europe, except in Greece, of course. They use the term Greek to refer to foreigners, right? And in Spanish, the RAE has had for 900 years, griego and its derivative gringo have long before the colonies existed. Gringo was already in the language, right? There was no United States, there was no North America. I mean, North America existed, just Columbus hadn't come yet. Gringo was already the word to refer to like the French and the Germans and the Greeks, right? They were just foreigners. So gringo is just a generic Spanish for foreigner. So technically, anyone who's expats are always gringos in Spanish. But in the Spanish-speaking world, we do give a certain amount of gringo refers to people who are of a significantly distant culture from the local region that is Spanish speaking using the word gringo. And so the nearest place that qualifies, like Nicaraguans, would not refer to Mexicans as gringos because even though they're foreigners from a national perspective, they're not actually foreigners from a linguistic nor a cultural perspective, right? Nicaragua used to be for thousands of years part of Mexico or the Aztec or the Olmec empires. And it was a Nahuatl region, as is, so Nahuatl here, N-A-W-A-T, whereas Mexico has Nahuatl, which is N-A-H-U-A-T-L, but they're pronounced almost identically, and they're linguistically related. So it's too close to really, you can't call it, that would be like someone from Texas calling someone from New York a gringo. Well, no, you're too close. Right, so America, the United States, represents the first country that anyone in this region, from Mexico to the Colombia, Venezuela region, can classify as a gringo. So they tend to associate it very strongly. But if you're here in Nicaragua, right, and someone comes from France or Germany or even Spain, they're a gringo as well, and it's used correctly, right? Everyone's a gringo. So yes, I mean, I'm not born in Nicaragua. I'm a native English speaker, so definitely a gringo, as anyone would be. Just BS anyway. Expat does sound BS to me. Well, how does expat sound BS to you? Immigrant should sound BS because I'm an immigrant. Right, but to someone who doesn't immigrate, why would you call them an immigrant? And as expat, just listen to the word, means expatriate, living outside your country, no longer in your home country. In English, anything but expat should sound like BS. You should question, why would someone want you? Why would someone ever have told you not to use expat? Right, that's the thing that really you should question. In Spanish, Diego, it's expatriado is expat, but I don't know anyone who uses it because I think most everyone in Spanish says just says expat, right? So it's, but the reason you don't use it in Spanish is that, so in English, an expat, as the word is often used, means that you're outside your home country, but in Spanish, it means you've lost your citizenship and been ejected from the country. Now, in English, expat is not positive or negative. All people who exist outside their country, whether by their right, it could be like me, I just chose to leave, I'm an expat. But someone who was deported would also be an expat. A person who was native, who was exported, would also be an expat. So that would be a negative. Mine, you could see as a positive, however you want to look at it. If you were in the, for example, if you're in the United States and you serve in the military, you went to Vietnam and you went missing in action, became a prisoner of war, and you were stuck in another country, you would also be an expat, not a willing expat, right? But you would still be an expat. So expat applies to everything, regardless of why they're there, right? And but in Spanish, it has to have this negative connotation. You have to have been ejected from your country and barred from reentry. Maybe someone sometime in their life can reenter, but it's not the same, right? So Spanish doesn't have, to the best of my knowledge, any word that directly means the same thing as expat, meaning anybody who's outside of their home country. Partially because in English, it's like a really big deal to leave your country, and in the rest of the world, it's a normal thing. Says, keep saying gringo, fancy gringo. Muddy, I really don't get you, dude. Muddy says, rent's going up. Okay, Cerote. Yep, we know what that means. Diego says, money. No offense, gringo. What does Cerote mean? Means shit. Yeah. Diego says, yeah, expatriado does sound rough. Yes, it's very, very different. Muddy says, because no one is called expat here. No, you're wrong, Muddy. So this is a trick. This is what I explained already. They are trying to play you. They're trying to get you to repeat the term immigrant incorrectly to harm these communities, right? And I'm telling you, one, it's not okay to do. It's not okay for them to do. It's not okay for anyone to knowingly use immigrant to refer to expats. It's never okay. It's never okay to lie about anything. But this is the whole video we're saying at the beginning, right? Don't repeat lies. It makes you start to believe them, right? And so you're being told by liars that your expats are actually immigrants. Well, you know that they're not, right? You know that's false. You know English, so you know it can't be true. Just listen to the words, and you know. You say, you're not calling yourself an expat when I go to Central America, but you should, right? Because you don't want to lie about it. And if you said immigrant, that would be false, right? When you visiting, you can't be an immigrant, right? But it would suck anyway. Just because I moved doesn't mean I'm unpatriotic, right? It doesn't imply that at all, right? That's just not what the word means. So I understand why that you might want to read into it, but patriotic, you just don't like the only word that means living outside a country. And that's fine. If you don't like it, then say nothing. But don't use another word that's wrong. That's the thing, right? Now, patriotic, right, is a difficult one. As someone said, I love this quote, patriotism refers to the poor being tricked into dying for the rich. Patriotism is not a positive thing in a country. Patriotism is a very bad thing, right? It sounds good, right, to have patriotism. Well, only in America are you taught that your country is more important than its people. So patriotism is actively a negative, like expat in Spanish. But in the U.S., it's used so much, as with many misinformation tactics, propaganda tactics, it gets repeated. In the same way that patriot now is often used for someone who hates their country, right? People are afraid of people who are classified as patriots. It's become a very negative term in much of English-speaking world. So you have to be careful that that has never meant quite what you think, and is now taking on new meanings. Right, but Diego's correct, right? It has nothing to do with not being patriotic. The only implication is that you left the country, so you must be unpatriotic. So if that's the case, right, then so expat simply means you live outside the country, but immigrant means you abandoned your old country, right? So I'm an immigrant in Nicaragua, so you could make an argument that you can't with regular expats, that I'm less patriotic because I've actually given up being in that country. I'm not just temporarily outside of it. So it's easy to make an unpatriotic implication. I don't think it's correct, right? I would say that many people leave the country because they're patriotic in the positive sense, right? We do support our countries. We believe the best way to do so is by not being there, right? And that's a different discussion about how being in a country by your presence is voting with your wallet, voting with your presence, and in some case, if you are able to participate in votes, maybe one thing. But in a country that doesn't have a democratic system, like the US, your presence can be used against you because you don't have the power of your own vote. Other people control your vote. And so your voice may be used for the opposite of what you want. You want to support your country. Someone wants to gerrymander and use it against your country. And so Diego says, if I were to move to the U.S. for a job, will I be an immigrant or an expat? Clearly an expat. Expats move for jobs. Immigrants may choose to stay forever for employment purposes. That may be the driving factor for an immigrant. But in any discussion where you say, I moved for a job, that's expat, right? There's nothing in there that implies immigrant. You have to have something to make it an immigrant, right? Just like if I moved to Nicaragua for, cost of living, right? That would not imply that I was becoming an immigrant. And most people who do that do not become immigrants. Not just when they do it. They never become immigrants in most cases. Really just BS words and labels. Anyone can live wherever they want and do or believe anything they want. If that was the case, right, you wouldn't be concerned about using expat, but they're not BS words, right? They're very meaningful things. And I just don't understand why are you saying it's BS to be accurate? Because you want to have a word that tells someone that you live outside a country. And I actually think the English is much better here, right? In many cases, Spanish is better. Some cases, English is better. This is one I think where English is clearly better, right? Because in Spanish, you can't easily talk about a person who is living somewhere but is non-permanent. You're just like, I guess they're a tourist. Like, it's the only word, but they're not really a tourist. They've been there for 10 years. Do you really want to call them a tourist? Do you really want that to be the only word you have? Because you can't call them an immigrant, right? Because we don't want to lie, but you need to be able to specify someone who is an immigrant in a country, because it is in all countries a different classification, right? And people can't just live where they want. That would be wonderful. That's how it should be. And we just lost the camera. Hold on. That is a battery problem because I'm running on very, very taxed batteries this week. Because we did a few shows. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I don't know why this battery compartment doesn't want to open while I'm doing the show. I do have batteries at the ready, so this should be real fast. I was not planning on this being a very long live stream, so I was kind of like, I can run on this partial battery without a problem. Should have been okay, but I'm not. Sorry. All right, I do believe we are back. Let's see if it picked up the image. It did. So the idea that it's BS to be able to classify if someone's a citizen or a resident or temporary or permanent, I have a hard time believing that you believe that. That just doesn't seem to make any sense. Why would you not want the ability to know or discuss basic existence things, right? Like, and even if you do have the ability to live wherever you want, you still need to be able to classify if someone's from there or not, right? Oh, they're a foreigner, they're new. You use the term gringo. Why did you use that if you feel these? I don't believe. Okay, here's my thing. You said gringo. You don't believe what you just said. You can't. You can't have said that and use gringo. Gringo means foreigner, right? Gringo is your way of saying expat, but in the opposite direction. Right? Expat refers to the fact, in English, that I'm not living in my home country. But it only refers that I'm outside the country. I could be on a boat in the middle of the ocean and be an expat. Right? It doesn't imply that I'm anywhere. I could be on the moon and be an expat. But to be a gringo, I have to be in a place that I'm not from. So expat in English has to do with where you aren't. Gringo in Spanish has to do with where you are. And so they're the similar phrase, right? One denotes that you're no longer in your homeland, and the other denotes that you are a foreigner in a new land, potentially for a really long time. And so with that, right, you can't feel these terms are BS and have used that. So that's just basics, right? So you are using these terms. So I think you've committed to them. Now, the thing you have to use is you must use them accurately. And technically, right, you're saying that your background is from Guatemala, so you're a gringo to Americans, right? Because you're a foreigner. We're both gringos. The difference is you grew up there and I didn't get to grow up here. So I'm more of a gringo because I don't have the background of having been born here. Um, Diego says, I don't really agree with you. The correct use of words is important, especially on legal matters, right? And this is where America uses it. They use it to manipulate the vote, they use it to manipulate the courts by getting people to state misinformation about themselves and their community and things, right? So if you said, oh, there's a group of expats living over here, nobody would react. They're like, okay, so they're people who voluntarily are living here. They're probably contributing to the community, and they'll probably leave because they didn't immigrate, right? So they're temporary, maybe for a really long time, but it seems fine, right? They're not coming in and taking over. But when you change it to immigrant, even if they're not, and you said there's an immigrant community over here, what people hear, whether right or not, is these are permanent people who have come, and they must be working, and they must be taking our jobs, they must be taking our healthcare, because they have to. They immigrated, so they have the rights, they have a necessity of these things that expats don't necessarily, but might, probably, but not necessarily. And so if you want to create panic, if you want to manipulate a vote, if you want to trick people into thinking minorities are a danger or are invading or are something to be concerned about, you take the big group of millions of expats and just start calling them immigrants, and it will have that impact naturally because English speakers naturally hear the difference. You don't have to explain what an expat and an immigrant are to most English speakers. Even if we can't define it, and most people can't because they don't sit around thinking about it, we hear the difference. We know that one is outside your country and one is a process you have to go through, right? Immigrant is not, you don't just walk in at the airport one day and become an immigrant, but you do just walk in the airport one day and become an expat. Right? We don't worry about people who just showed up off of an airplane and are like, I'm here for, I'm going to buy a place on the beach and retire. No one's worried about them taking your job. They're 80. They just want to wind down on Miami Beach and party some, right? That sounds great. That's an expat in most cases. But when they're an immigrant, you're like, it's a different thing. And we should not hear immigrant as a negative thing, of course, but people do everywhere, right? So here in Nicaragua, we don't have this problem, right? It's because we're moving into a Spanish place, so there's no word. They just know us as expats, and they understand that that's correct. It's amazing, though, that in Nicaragua, no one has this linguistic problem. They all know what expats are and what immigrants are. But when you go to an English-speaking country, because they're using it to manipulate people, no one knows what it is, right? So. What the heck was I saying? I got derailed. Here in Nicaragua, right? We have so the expat community is not that big, but it's in the thousands. So let's say it's about 5,000 expats, but the number of immigrants is in the hundreds, right? So people don't fear immigrants here because there just aren't very many, right? We're not moving the needle in any way, but we are core to our communities, but we're very, very tiny as a pool. At least those of us coming from like non-Central American countries. They don't track like Guatemalans and Hondurans the same as they do everyone else. So for those of us who are outside that region, we're just small numbers. But if you were to classify the expats as immigrants, it would be a scary number. But as long as you don't, it's yes, 5,000 expats in the whole country. When you come to places like Leon and you realize there's only like 200, you're like, oh, I guess that is true. We do all know each other. No, it's Diego. We've heard the numbers. It does not include the pure tourists, but the actual number is so small. It's crazy. Obviously, we're not talking about backpackers here for the weekend. We're talking about the people who actually live here, but just the whatever. Muddy says, Diego, they'll label you an immigrant and F with you. Lots of assholes depend on where you live. Yes, but what we're saying, Muddy, is if you use immigrant instead of expat, you are part of the problem. You're encouraging it. You're supporting it. And just using the right words isn't going to fix it. But using the right words is a powerful tool to start fixing it, right? If everybody suddenly used the correct terms in America, if everyone demanded, if everyone was like, What's with all the Americans who can't speak English? Why are the expats the ones who have to teach them English? We've got an education problem, right? That would sound very different than a bunch of expats just going, we'll call ourselves the wrong thing and screw ourselves over just because we're angry and we let them manipulate us. Don't let them manipulate you, right? Don't be ICE's agent. Work against them, or at least don't support them. But when you use immigrant instead of expat, you're working for ICE, right? So don't do that. No matter what side you're on, right? If ICE is going to do something, make sure they have to do it as much as possible, honestly. Don't empower them to use trickery. Brent says, hope your daughter's fine and done with her shots. She has one more in January for the last tetanus shot. I was wondering, was that post-bite treatment just standard procedure, or was it because the cat displayed some concerning symptoms or behavior? Oh, no, it's just standard. They always treat for rabies here. We haven't had a rabies exposure or an actual rabies case of any animal in Occidental since 1996. But one of the reasons that we don't is because we're crazy cautious about it. So Nicaragua was just a better safe than sorry, but she did get scratched, and tetanus is a thing. Also, for those who don't know, symptoms of rabies can take up to 12 years to show. The chances that you would get rabies from an animal that had symptoms approaches zero. Your chances of getting rabies, sure, but this is just a thing that people don't know. There's essentially no possibility of an animal that has rabies showing rabies and being what you get exposed to. It's just wait, Diego, you know of hundreds of expats in Doral? That is a crazy number. I do know a lot of expats talk about Doral as the expat place to go for people who don't want to be in an enclave. But even when I was there, I didn't see a single one. Not that I would see, I would expect to see one if there were hundreds. Doral's tiny. Money says foreigner. I think he's referring to immigrant, like mixing all these things together. And a lot of them overlap, obviously. Foreigner and expat are related. Immigrant, of course, is not. Rex Hernandez says, you're the man, Scott. Thank you, Rex. I appreciate that. Money says, you can't vote or run for office. No, so that's not accurate. An immigrant normally can vote and often can run for office. The only office that I know of in the United States that you can't run for as an immigrant is president, which is pretty hard to run for anyway. But immigrants run for tons of office all the time in the United States and vote all the time. So that's misinformation. Expats can't run for office anywhere in the world and can't vote anywhere in the world. Immigrant implies strongly that you probably can run for office and you probably are at least on a path to voting. Just like me here in Nicaragua, while I'm not political and don't get involved and have no particular interest, I'm on a path to become a citizen as a full immigrant, and being able to run for office and vote are things that actually would apply to me. People I know who have done that, they can run for office and vote. I don't know anyone who does run for office, right? As a foreigner, in a place like the United States, it's much easier to run for office and be involved as a foreigner because of the giant melting pot kind of situation. But here in a place like Nicaragua, being a foreigner would put you so far outside of the local communities, because things are much more like I can stand on the forum and talk to all the people, right? Like old Athens. There's just why would anyone vote for a foreigner, even if they're really nice and trying to do a good job and whatever? Because the alternative is definitely a guy you grew up with, or a girl you grew up with, who's been here for forever and just understands the challenges better. Like, I can be as passionate as I want, but the reality is I will never have the deep understanding of Nicaragua's challenges at a cultural level, at the community level, at the barrio level, and so forth, as someone born in Nicaragua, right? So I would be a terrible politician in Nicaragua, not because I don't want to do good things potentially, but simply because I don't have the necessary knowledge to connect with the community, to identify with the community, to converse with the community. Also, my Spanish is not as good as a native, right? There's just nuances that I'd be missing. But as you see in the United States, as a foreigner, it's really easy to have a better grasp of English than the average American, right? Find someone who was born in the United States who can articulate expat and immigrant, right? You'll find them, but they're rare. Way, way too rare. But talk to someone who's just living there, someone who's an expat, and they'll be like, yeah, no one seems to know basic English here, right? Like that's really, so that nuance is potentially lost. Even as an American who has lived in different parts of the United States, I can tell you the nuances of culture that you would expect in most countries, we don't have. Just because, I grew up in Western New York, but I lived a long time in Dallas. I lived some time in Pittsburgh. Those nuances are different in those different places. And so even Americans just moving around their own country are practically foreigners and are treated that way, right? My New York ID had to be changed for a Texas ID when I moved, right? We're treated like we're immigrants to a new state, to a new cultural zone. So it's a little bit crazy. Brent says, seems like Spanish doesn't even have a word for expat. They have no word that is exactly the same, that's for sure. Extranjero and gringo are really all I've heard. Neither are translations of expat. Correct. Yeah, they take the opposite approach of foreigner. So extranjero is the proper word for foreigner, and gringo is a slang term for foreigner that's been around for so long that it's official. But it's still informal and formal, so think of it that way. They're both correct, but one is informal. Neither is exactly the same as expat. And very importantly, expat does imply very strongly you're not on vacation. Gringo, in no way whatsoever, implies that you're not on vacation, right? So if any of my American or Canadian audience, or British or German or Australian or whatever, Russian, Malawian, if you fly over to Nicaragua for the weekend and you're like, I'm going to do some volcano boarding and go see the Guerteria, you're a gringo because you're a foreigner, or you're an extranjero because you're a foreigner, but you're not an expat. You didn't leave your country. You didn't move out of your country. You're just traveling. You didn't establish an apartment. You didn't change your address. You didn't change your phone number, nothing like that. So gringo and extranjero apply instantly the moment you're in a new country, but don't apply just because you left your old country. Expat applies the moment you leave your old country with the intent of being gone for a while, long enough to establish residence somewhere, not residency, just residence, and applies even if you never end up somewhere, right? Even if you just get on a boat and float around somewhere without borders, you're still an expat, but you wouldn't be a gringo. There's no one to be a gringo to. You have to be foreign to a person who is not foreign in a place to be a gringo. Jan says, I got the rabies series from a dog bite here. Scott knows, of course. Diego says, lots of Cubans, Venezuelans, Spanish, and Colombians. Oh, okay. Remember, I don't know if you were on when I said it, Diego. Generally here, they don't classify certain groups as expats when they're using the roles. I think Colombians, they do, but Spanish are foreign, so they should be in the roles. No. Because Spanish has always, until it's only proposed that their status is going to change, they're not fully considered expats in the same way. Cubans are not considered in the same way. Venezuelans are normally classified as refugees, which is an expat for sure, but they're special classifications. And so I understand, right, when we say there's 5,000 expats, that we are referring to what the government refers to as expats. And there are huge numbers, right? Costa Ricans, Guatemalans, Colombians, Venezuelans. There are big numbers here. They do not call them expats. They don't put them in the roles with the numbers. Colombians, maybe they do. I don't know. But Cubans, Spaniards, and Venezuelanos, they do not. And it makes sense, right? So they're using expat to mean people who are moving here voluntarily, moving here with the very high potential of having the option to be on the immigration path, and so forth. Right? If you're here on a refugee path, you're not able to do that. It's a different thing. So it's the people going through, let's put it a different way. It's the people going through pensionado, rentista, and investor paperwork are the paths, and most of those people are not. So if that helps to explain it. All right, guys, it has been we're almost at an hour and a half, which is not at all what I was intending to do, but that is I actually that was a really great example. So for anyone, we have lots of videos that dig into the linguistic details of all of those terms. We have covered it ad nauseum in the past, so no one should be lacking on resources for that. But I think it fit really well because we talked about the dangers of allowing people to lie and then repeating a lie, and how it causes our brains to change. So it's a great example because this is an exact example of a different type of use of that same propaganda tactic, where you can see it playing out, something that we're all familiar with. We always see the news cycles from the United States where those terms are being misused, and misused for very clear designed harm, right? Not changing decision making, but it actually is, right? Because they're using them to try to manipulate voters into not understanding what the problems are, the challenges are, so that they vote in a way that isn't what they intend. Diego says, I've never gone. My family is evangelical, so I've never participated. Oh, in the Gritteria. Brent says, did you guys go out shouting for Gritteria? I am just watching Stranger Things with my kids, but a lot of people did. Was just reading something about the history of the tradition. Pretty interesting, and apparently started there in Leon, I think. Diego, if it makes you feel any better, there is nothing Catholic whatsoever about the Gritteria. It's a pagan rite that is just done by the Catholic Church. We were talking about this in the WhatsApp group earlier today. I have gone out for it. It's interesting. I should point out, I just talked to Michael. He went out and they had 2 phones. So it's a ton of people crowd in during the event. They had 2 phones stolen. These types of events where you have huge crowds, obviously violence becomes very much not a concern. Like, that's not going to happen. But pickpockets and stuff like that, very, very, very risky. So that happened, and we don't hear about that too often, but it did here. Fireworks are still going. The entire live stream, the fireworks have never stopped. All right, guys, thanks very much. Have a good night. We will see all of you tomorrow.